Okay, so we talked about treadmill tests, cycle ergometer tests, and run walk tests. Another option is a step test. This one also, this is a field method that requires a small space, so it has that advantage. These are 4 different test protocols that are pretty common. The YMCA test is a 3-minute test. The Queen's test is a 3-minute test. The step tool is a number of steps, and so each of these tests vary in the amount of time that they take, but they're all pretty short. They vary in the step height. One of the advantages of the web test is that the step height is related to leg length. And so that's an advantage of that test. So if you think about, we've done a 3-minute step test. Most of them are about a 12-inch step. And there's a difference in exertion required between somebody who's 5 foot tall and somebody who's 6 foot tall, right? Somebody that has longer legs, it's going to be easier for them to climb that 12-inch step than a shorter person. So the shorter person is having to exert more energy to get up there, and so there's some variation in accuracy in the YMCA and Queen's test because step height is the same for everyone. And so that's an advantage of the web protocol. Also, you want to consider when choosing any of these tests, step, treadmill, cycle, is the age group and gender that they're validated in. So if we don't have any research that says that this test accurately predicts VO2 max in women over 50, then that test is not appropriate for a female client that's over 50. So you want to look at that data as well. So anyway, those are some advantages of step test. The next thing I want to talk about is some exercise prescription guidelines. This is basically the same information that I showed you in the previous unit for ACSM guidelines for exercise. This table is specifically for cardiorespiratory endurance exercise. And then you can see on the left side, it's frequency, intensity, time type, volume, and progression. So when you see in the literature, what's your FIT VP, this is what it's talking about. What is your frequency, intensity, time type, volume, and progression for exercise? So when you're prescribing an exercise program, you've got to factor in all of these values. You can't just say, hey, go get on a treadmill. If you say that, you've only talked about the type of exercise. You haven't told them how long they need to work out. You have to be, if we're making specific and measurable goals, we need to be a specific and measurable program. So make sure you program each value in these categories. So intensity, they have it listed here as heart rate reserve. I'm going to show you in a minute some other ways that your client can monitor their exercise intensity, just because sometimes a heart rate response isn't always available, or sometimes your client doesn't want to do math to figure out whether they're exercising intensely or not. Duration and intensity and volume vary based on whether you're working out at a moderate level or a vigorous level. If you're exerting more energy, you don't have to work out as long. And then I do want you to pay attention to the progression. So when you're thinking about changes in your exercise program over time, you want to make sure that your program increases in difficulty as the person's ability increases. If there's no, if the exercise program at any point stops being challenging, there's going to stop being improvement, and then they don't need you, right? So we want to make sure we're progressing as they improve, and 5 to 10 minutes every 1 to 2 weeks is a general guideline for making those changes. So if you start with a mile, then we may go up, and that takes them 10 minutes. Then now we're going to try to run a 1.5 miles, and that should take about 15 minutes. So that's an example of how that might be used. So these are some other measures of exercise intensity. I'm going to post a separate video for calculating target heart rate for exercise using the heart rate reserve method for you guys to look at. METS is also a calculation that you could use to determine the intensity of exercise. The advantage of METS is that you can go to this compendium of physical activity. I'm going to pull up, and I'll make sure this link is posted in the module so you can explore and go to any activity. So let's say you're going to go for a run. It will tell you how many METs that activity is, so you don't have to actually do the math. However, you do have to go look it up. It's not something that you could know in advance. Or I guess you could look, like if you know you're going to try to run with a goal of 4 miles per hour, then your METs are 6. And that may or may not be within your range that you're trying to shoot for your exercise program. But it's not something that I can like look at my watch real quick while I'm running and determine what my METs are. So that makes it a little bit more complicated. So I personally don't use METs much, but some people do. The last two are easier for your client to understand and use, and that's the rate of perceived exertion and the talk test. And you can see that broken down in this chart here. So the rate of perceived exertion is a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being basically rest and 10 being like the most energy you could exert without collapsing. And then you can see in this middle column how that relates to your ability to talk. So if you go walk with a friend and you can talk normally without having to take a breath to interrupt your sentences with a breath, then you're probably not working hard enough. So you should have to take a breath every 1 to 2 sentences if you're working at a moderate level. If it's getting hard to, you're going to have to interrupt each sentence with a breath, then we're starting to get into a vigorous level. If you're getting to a point where you're gasping for breath, you might be working too hard, right? And so that's something that's easy for somebody to understand that's not in the sciences. So bottom line, your job is to use exercise assessment to create goals for your client and create an appropriate exercise program for them.